Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our series going through the 10 Commandments. Go ahead and open up your Bibles if you have one to Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. We are going to be on commandment number 6 today. We've gotten past the first 5. We're halfway through it, guys. But today we're going into a commandment that I feel like a lot of people misunderstand. They hear the commandment, think it's simple, think they get it, and I can understand why. It's a very short commandment. It's only 4 words long. But a lot of people really do misunderstand this. So after you get to Exodus 20, verse 13, I also want you to put your finger on Matthew 5:22, because we're going to be in Matthew 5 for a little bit today, because Jesus has some thoughts on this commandment as well, and Jesus is going to add some context, which suddenly makes this whole commandment seem a little bit more in depth. I'm very, very excited. Let's not waste any time, because there's a lot to go over, and I want to make sure I get everything out that I can. So let's jump into the passage. Exodus 20, verse 13. Like I said, short verse, but here it is. You shall not murder. There it is, guys. Commandment number 6. You shall not murder. Some translations say, thou shalt not murder. This commandment seems pretty easy. As a matter of fact, to a lot of the Jews and Pharisees of the time, they probably read this and said, oh, shoot, easy. I just don't kill anybody. That's it. That's all there is to it. There's no gray area. It's all very simple. I just don't have to kill anyone. And that was kind of the mentality that a lot of people had towards this commandment. In fact, that's the mentality that a lot of Jews and a lot of Pharisees had towards a lot of the commandments coming after number 5. Because commandments 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10 all seem very easy because they're commanding you not to perform a sinful action. And murder seems like one of the easiest sinful actions not to commit, because all you have to do, right, is not kill anyone. However, there's a little bit more to the verse. Let's actually break this down. The first thing I want to do is I want to break down what murder meant when God said it. What does God mean when he says, thou shalt not murder? I've heard some vegans and vegetarians argue that this verse says that God doesn't want us to kill animals and eat them. Like we should not kill any of God's creations, no killing of animals. It's not true. The verse is very clear. Thou shalt not murder. Murder and kill are 2 very different commandments. They are 2 very different words. Killing is just the ending of a life. Murder is the willful taking of another human life. Murder is the willful taking of another human life. Now, the reason is arbitrary. You could say it's for revenge. You could say it's to get their money. You could say it's to get back at someone, which goes into revenge. You could say it's for the greater good. You could say it's because they're a bad person. You could have a lot of reasoning, but at the end of the day, it says, thou shalt not murder. Now, of course, that brings up another question. What about circumstances of war or circumstances of self-defense? We can read further into the Bible and the law of the Bible to talk about what God says about killing and war and killing and self-defense and all that kind of stuff. We can read that, but I think people who go to that direction already know what the Bible probably says about it, and they're trying to split hairs here. What it says is, thou shalt not take another human life. Thou shalt not murder anyone. And again, this seems pretty simple and cut and dry, doesn't it? Believe it or not, a lot of the Pharisees and Jews thought the same way. So they didn't think about the verse in context of the way God viewed it. There's something I want you to keep in mind about the 10 Commandments and about all the laws that God gave his children and the laws that God continues to give his children, and it's this. For God, it is not just about a behavior. It is about a mindset. It is about a heart conditioning. Not heart condition, heart conditioning. How we live, how we think, how we believe, how we look at our neighbor. Here's the thing. A long time ago, Jesus was asked by a guy, he said, Lord, what must I do to achieve eternal life? And Jesus replied, you know the law, what does it say? And the man said, the law says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, correct, you do that and you will live. You can take those 2 things, loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor as yourself, and put those all as the 10 Commandments, because that's what the 10 Commandments are. The first few verses, the first 5 verses, are all about loving God. The last 5 verses are all about loving your neighbor. But notice that word, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Now, obviously, murdering your neighbor does not show you love them, but love is not just a behavioral action, it is a heart conditioning. It is how you condition your viewing of other people. Your behavior towards others does not demonstrate your love for them. It demonstrates your love for God. Do you love God enough to follow his commandments and to love his children? And to prove this, to sort of explore this, let's jump to Matthew 5:22. Matthew 5:22. Now Matthew 5:22 is going to give us something very important, but before we can read Matthew 5:22, let's read 21. Quite often when I do scriptural discussions, I think it's important to read the before and after verses. So let's read Matthew 5:21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. Now that's Matthew 5:21. Jesus is mentioning this commandment. Jesus has mentioned this commandment. He's saying, you've heard it said, thou shalt not murder. Okay? He's laying that out there. You know the commandment. We've read the commandment. We know what it says. That's what we've heard. Now Matthew 5:22. But I tell you, Jesus is setting the groundwork, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. Y'all want to take a moment to appreciate what he just said? Let's read that one more time. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. See, one thing that's important to keep in mind here is that a lot of the Pharisees probably said, I've never killed anyone, but it's okay if I wish death on them. It's okay if I said, you should go kill yourself. You know what? I hope you die. You're a terrible person. You should die. I can do that as long as I don't actually kill them. I haven't violated any commandment. I haven't broken the commandment. I haven't done anything wrong. All I said is that I wish they were dead. All I said is that I think they should die, but I've never actually killed them. I've thought in my head about how much I want to kill them, but I haven't actually done it, so I'm good. And Jesus is saying, if you even hold contempt for your brother or sister, if you hate your brother or sister, you've already killed them in your own heart, because it's a heart conditioning. Now, some of you are saying, whoa, Raven, that is unreasonable. You're saying I can't even be angry? No, you can be angry. Anger is a natural response to being upset. Anger is a natural response to being wronged. It happens. We have the right to be angry. God gets angry. Jesus got angry. Anger is fine. But we're not talking about just anger here. We're not just talking about, gosh, that makes me angry. No, we're talking about hate and contempt. We're talking about wanting someone dead in your heart. Let's say that you're playing a video game, right? Let's play this game. You're playing a video game, having a really rough time of it, and some guy is being really inappropriate, really toxic, just giving you a hard time. It happens, and you say, God, I wish this guy would just die, and you're not talking about in the game. That is committing murder within your own heart. You are wishing death upon someone out of hatred and fury. You are holding contempt in your heart for someone else, and that is a wrongful heart conditioning. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, Raven, question, what's wrong with that? I haven't hurt him. He has no idea how I feel about him. He's not bothered by it. Why does it matter that I feel this way? There are two reasons you should care. There are two reasons it matters. The first is because God knows. God knows your heart, and he knows how you feel, and God isn't going to be happy knowing that you wish death on one of his children, no matter how shamefully they behave. But two, the second reason? Because that kind of hate built up in your heart will lead to problems for you down the road. Stress, depression, falling out of relationships. When you carry around hatred and anger and resentment your whole life, and believe me, you will. Some of you may think, no, I'll just drop it after a while. Will you? If you build up a habit of holding contempt for people and holding grudges, inevitably that will build up, and you will eventually start building up these bad habits. You will build up a bad worldview. You will build up a bad mindset. Believe me, I get it. I get the idea of just wanting to hurt someone. And guys, I think we've all been there. Someone wrongs you, so you think in the back of your mind about all the ways you could get back at them. And sometimes you go to that point where you wish you could just kill them. And you know what? Somewhere You feel like that feels right. That feels good. But God says that's the wrong heart conditioning. Because even if it's just in your own heart, you've killed someone. You've murdered someone in your own heart. You hold hate and contempt for someone else in your own heart. That's not godly. That's not godly. And again, I want to make this clear. There's nothing wrong with being angry. When we're talking about anger in this case, we're talking about seething, brooding bitterness against someone. And it can go out of control. It can go out of control. And it can ruin your life. It can ruin other people's lives. Hatred for other people can destroy you. You know, actually, weird to bring up Star Wars in this. I know it's weird, but think about this. Do you remember Yoda's little speech about being afraid? Like how when you're afraid, it slowly leads to these other things, and then fear leads to sadness, sadness leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. I think that's how it went. These things all build up on themselves. These things all lead to one problem after another. Guys, I'm going to be real. We need to try to avoid hate. We need to try to avoid anger and bitterness and disgust. We live in, I'm going to be real, we live in a day and age where it's easy. Do you know what the mainstream media tries to do constantly? Build up hate, whether it's against one of the presidential candidates, be it Trump or Kamala, it's against certain political viewpoints, it's against certain countries, it's against certain agencies, it's against certain gaming companies, it's against each other. They want you to hate. Someone out there must be your enemy and you must hate them. We have to be better than that. We cannot allow hate to rule our hearts, because the more we let hate rule our hearts, the more it leads to something destructive. The more it leads to something damning. Oh yeah, it's all easy to just, wish someone were dead, or to think we want someone dead, or to think we hate someone, or to just hold that in our hearts, but inevitably that will pour out into the real world somehow. And it will be noticed. And Jesus makes it clear, just holding hatred for your brother or sister puts you in danger of judgment. Now I know the last thing y'all are probably thinking, okay, Raven, let's say you're right. Let's say you're right, and, even hating your brother or sister, like really hating them, is equitable to murder in God's eyes. Well, then I'm in real trouble because there are days where I just can't help but hate someone. There are some days where I just can't help it. I get it. I really do. But that's why Jesus was pointing out why this commandment isn't so simplistic. See, I think a lot of people look at the 10 Commandments as a checklist and they go, okay, yeah, I did that wrong. I didn't do that one. I didn't murder anyone. I'm good there. And then they just go down the list. And Jesus is saying, no, here's a reality. It's not just a behavior. It's a heart conditioning. It is a heart conditioning. And that is the beauty of the gospel. That's why the gospel is so important. Because the more you recognize what the 10 Commandments are calling for us to do, and the more Jesus talks about them in full context, the more you realize, oh my gosh, I'm way worse than I thought I was. And I'm not saying I'm any better. I am guilty. I'm just as guilty of a lot of these, including this one. Oh, I've held hate in my heart. I've held hate in my heart for certain things and people that I'd rather not talk about anymore. And sometimes it is so easy to just fall into that habit of, God, I hate this guy. I just can't stand him. But then I have to stop myself and realize this isn't the way God will want me to think about others. So yes, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to voice your anger. I can say, man, I am just so angry at this person right now. The way they're treating me, gosh, the way this person is acting is just awful and I can't stand it. That's fine. But when you start holding contempt, when you start holding hate, when you start pouring out your vitriol against people, even if it's in the confines of your own head, inevitably that's going to cause you problems. Inevitably, that is going to cause you problems. Letting go of hate, practicing a forgiving heart, that is what Jesus called us to do and taught us to do. What did you guys think? What do you guys think about this commandment? It's kind of crazy, isn't it? And what Jesus applies to it is nuts, you know? And yet, I can also see why it's so important. I look at the world today and I just see a world that has been so divided by hate. Do you not see how hate can pour out and turn us against each other? Certainly, we're not all at each other's throats trying to kill each other right now, but how close are we coming to that? All because hate has been allowed to fester. Something to keep in mind. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this session, and I will see you in my next one. Take care.